So thank you very much, Yoshino-sensei, for the introduction. Particular thanks to Dr. Paul to invite me to give me this chance to share with you my recent research. And of course, thank everyone to come during lunch. Not really lunchtime in ADVI, but I hope, after the presentation, you will have a good appetite for the lunch later. So this research is about also my name is Lei Lei, as Yoshino-sensei mentioned. It's different kanji, although it looks the same in English. So I want to explain a little bit since many people know Chinese character here. And then, so I'm a researcher at the Institute of Developing Economies. So Nihongo wa Asia Keizai Kenkyosho. So my research I'm going to talk today is about the impact of trade policy on technological innovation in agricultural markets. Okay, so this is the original first slides. And then this research topic is basically motivated by following reasons. So first of all, the increasing global interdependency has spreaded policy impact and innovation incentives through international trade, especially after the Doha round negotiation in the WTO system, particularly for agriculture trade. There has been an increasing number of non-tariff trade measures, including various of standards and regulations mainly concerned on food safety, human animal health, human labor welfare, animal welfare, environmental policies, and especially after these days, the SDG target set up by the United Nations. So because of those non-tariff measures, has induced the technological innovation and adoption in the agriculture sector. For example, in 2005, after the Montreal Protocol, one of the widely used fumigator in agricultural production, particularly in strawberry production, was banned because of its also depleting effect. And then those policy-induced technology innovation sometimes can have significant impact on agriculture development. There's another story, the Braceno program, which was launched by the U.S. government in 1940s. So the Braceno program is actually a labor policy in order to stop the Mexican migrants to America. But then because of this, it heavily affected the labor-intensive sector, including the agriculture sector. So because of this labor program, there was the innovation on machine harvest pickup. So it's really a big revolution for the agriculture sector. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is the story about a EU policy impact on the technological innovation in Apple markets. Because, since I started to do this research 2 years ago, whenever I talk to other people, I'm saying, I'm doing research on technological innovation in Apple markets. And everyone is like, oh, that's very interesting. Why the new version of iPhone come out so fast, So at least I know it's still the early stage of my presentation, but at least one take-home message for everyone today is that I'm doing research on the fruit apple, not the smartphone. Okay, so then the policy I'm looking is so the European Union, there has been long time debating on one of the chemical that they used for the post-harvest on apple production. There has been long debating in the European Commission. And finally, in 2014, the European Commission decided to drop the maximum residual level of a chemical called DPA on apples 50 times lower than the current level. And the DPA is a chemical applied to control the post-harvest physiological disorders of apples. So post-harvest physiological disorder in daily language is just saying the fruit will go bad and develop some problems after being picked up from the tree. So that's the normal language. And then so there's a picture showing some typical post-harvest disorders, like I think we can see it. If you buy the apple and don't eat it right away, there will become some, the skin will become superficial scald, and inside the flesh will become browning and soggy, kind of not taste good. So the DPA is a chemical, is the most prevalent chemical in the apple product and also pear production, has been widely used basically all around the world for apple producer and pear producer. And the thing that the 50 times lower is really, really strict. So it doesn't even allow any cross-contamination. By cross-contamination, I'm saying like, for example, the apple I just freshly picked up from the tree. I didn't do any post-harvest method on it. But then if I put it in the truck where it used to carry the apples was treated by the DPA, then even by touching the truck, then if you test the maximum residual level, you can still detect the DPA on it. So it's very strict. Basically, the EU policy is considered as a policy ban on using this DPA. So it's basically brought a big impact for world apple producers and pear producers if they want to still continue access to the European market. And then, so what will happen to to the world apple producers and exporters to EU, including America? So in this research, because of the data availability and information availability, I'm basically using the example for the US market, how the US apple exports, how the US apple markets react to this EU policy change. Well, of course, the model, the method I'm using can be generally applied to other countries, and hopefully the conclusion and policy implications are also applied to other, products and also other countries. So for the U.S. market, the European market, it's very, the European market itself, EU is the second largest apple producer in the world, and meanwhile, it's the second largest apple importers in the world. Although they produce a lot, but they also buy a lot. They mainly buy from China, America, and also the South Hemisphere apple producers, including Chile, those places. So basically, it affects world apple producer a lot. And in terms of America, you can see from this graph that in the past decades, the U.S. apple export to EU, the EU has been on average at the top 5 exporting destination for U.S. apples, and particularly for U.S. Apple production, mainly on the East Coast, the New York State, and the West Coast, the Washington State. So particularly for the Washington State farmers, their apple exports are mainly to the European market. So it will basically brought big loss for them. And it was calculated that it may brought about $20 million for apple sales loss for the U.S. farmers.
Quick question. So what would be Europe's total apple import? What percentage of that
for U.S. from U.S.? Sorry, I didn't, because it has been changing a lot, and also because before the top importer in European Union for apple is actually the UK. And then, so now because of the Brexit, so there's changes, but still there are like big market like other countries are still buying the American. They need to import apples from America, but now there's the market share changes.
20%, because that's important, right? Because if you talk about
price
changes and impact.
Yeah, sure. I just
wanted to know how big the impact would be if there is any.
Yeah, it's quite big, but I don't really know the number, especially after the Brexit. So but that's good. I will definitely check on and update on that. Yeah. And then then the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, actually have launched this technological innovation, the so-called biomarker technology. And it's a diagnostic tool, management-based system. So the biomarker is just like It's just like the pregnancy test. So it's some test you can insert to the apple flesh, and then by sample picking you can test the apple, and then by reading the results on the biomarker you can predict and diagnose and distinguish the post-harvest disorders before the potential post-harvest disorders before the problem evolves too far. So with this technology, like the testing thing, then it allows the marketers to release their products, earlier to the shelf before it's going bad. So it's mainly a management-based system. So this technology is considered as biased towards the storage input. So because it's imposed and mainly applied in the storage stage of the apple production. And it will favor the apples because there are different varieties of apples. Like in Japan, you have the Fuji, and in Japan, I don't really know the Fuji, Honey Crisp, like in American market, Granny Smith and Gala, all kinds of apples. So for different variety of apples, they have different level of susceptible to post-harvest disorders. So basically, some variety of apples, it's easy to go bad. It just have shorter shelf time. You have to eat them fast, early. But some apples, they are just they can stay longer after pick up from the tree. So it potentially, because this technology will benefit its storage input bias, so it will potentially favors the apples that are highly susceptible to post-harvest disorders most. And in this research, I assume the technology is fully adopted, because based on the information from the University of Washington, who is working with the USDA on this biomarker technology development, they say the cost will be very low, so it should be very easy, because it's like pregnancy test. It's very easy to operate, to adopt, and also the cost will be very low. So here I just assume it's fully adopted.
Sorry, what do you mean by the storage input factor?
The storage input factor, because the storage input factor is basically on because for apple or all kind of agricultural product, the input categorized as farm input or marketing input. So the storage is in the stage of farm input. So because once you pick up any fruit, you need to put them in storage, right? So the storage house and then the logistic, all those are considered as the storage input. Like you need to control temperature, moisturizer, all those are storage input.
It's like one of the factory inputs in production.
Exactly. Exactly. And so the research question here is basically trying to study what is the potential economic impact of EU food safety policy induced technological innovation, and which is biased to certain input in the apple's production in the U.S. apple market. So that's the research question. And here is a very easy, brief, simplified conceptual framework. It's just a simple profit maximization equation. And assume there are two types of product that the farmers are producing, Y1 and Y2. The Y1 and Y2, for producing Y1 and Y2, they use the same factor X1 and X2, but of course they have different factor intensivity in terms of using them. Just in terms of apple, like for you produce apple, there is the Honey Crisp and Fuji apple, right? And then for Honey Crisp apple, which is the apple easily to go in bad during storage, then during the production of Fuji apple, Honey Crisp apple, they require more input of the storage input. But in terms of Fuji apple, maybe it's just doesn't require as much as storage attention during that stage. So then the technology, which is the X1 factor here refers to the storage input, is X1 augmenting technology will be imposed to the production function G. And then just based on very simple first order condition, we can show that the biased technology will favor product 1, which is relatively intensively using the factor X1, which is the augmenting one. Just
two quick questions. What is the explicit form of G you are using? Douglas or?
Yeah, I just assume like the general, the Cobb Douglas. I didn't really explicitly write out the.
And based on what you just explained, W1 should be different from, W1 in your first square bracket, right? Should be different from W1 in your second square bracket because you talked about different intensity.
No, that's the price. The W1, W2 is the factor price here.
I see. So it remains constant.
Yeah.
But usually production function is capital and labor. But you're not assuming capital and labor in here?
I basically use X1 and X2 to generalize. It basically can be capital and labor. It's different notation. This is like generalized thing. I didn't mean to specify it to any particular production function. And then so the original hypothesis basically will be technological innovation biases toward a certain factor favors the product in which the factor is intensive. And meanwhile, it could lower the production of the product which is less intensive in the biased factor. And then so here is a simplified and generalized description of the US market. So again, I kind of simplified it, and instead of using capital or labor like the classic input, I just make it specific to the Apple market. So here the first input factor is the farm input, where the storage input that belongs to categorized in the farm input. And at the farm level, the apples can be grouped into the high-value apple and the low-value apple. So the high-value apple are the ones easily highly susceptible to post-harvest disorders, like the Honey Crisp, Granny Smith, and another one, Ampere apples in this case. And the low-value apples are the Gala apples, which are kind of post-harvest disorder resist. And then the second, here I put the mark. It's basically I'm saying the the technological innovation will affect here directly onto the farm input. And then the second major input in the U.S. apple production is the marketing input. So of course, when you sell apple, you need marketing input. And in terms of marketing input, the apples can be categorized into the high grade and the cow's apples. So the high grade apples is like the apple for U.S. market is extra fancy, U.S. number 1, and the cow's apple. So the extra fancy U.S. number 1 apples are the one who the apples looks good, and the color, basically the appearance are good. So they are usually sold as the final products as fresh apples as it is. But the cow's apples are basically the one weird shape, and then maybe there are scratch on the skin, the color is not pretty. So I think in Japanese market where the consumers are particularly strict about the appearance of food, the cow's apples are the one you don't consume them as final products, but rather you take them to processing to apple juice or apple jam. So apparently for a given variety of apples, then the marketing, in order to sell the cows, you need more marketing input. But for high-grade apples, which looks super pretty, you need relatively less marketing input. And also for the farm level, for the high-value apple, which are easy to become bad, they require more farm-level input than the low-value apples. So, and here the 2 marks I'm marking here is that because the American U.S. Here the the research question we are looking is American export fresh apple products to EU. So when there's the policy ban, it affects the high-grade apples, which is the consumed traded as final goods. And then another potential, the market is like once you adopt the biomarker technology, there can be some upgrading from the cow's apples to the high-grade apples. By saying that is like because of the new technology, you can detect the post-harvest disorder in advance, right? So you can prevent the apples before going bad, develop the superficial scald. So there can be some upgrading from the cow's apples to the higher grade apples. So that's like there can be two effects in this stage. And then so based on the two input categorization in output market, there will be like four varieties of apples. So they are the high value high grade apples, high value cows, and low value high grade apples, and low value cows apples. And then for this particular story, we are looking that there's the European food safety policy ban. It will apparently affecting this type high value high grade apple most, because the high value ones are the one highly susceptible to post-harvest disorder, and the high grade ones are the ones traded as final goods. So any question? Okay. And then so the model I'm using is the ex-ante assessment with a partial equilibrium linear elasticity model. This is a model we usually use in the agricultural economics field to evaluate exogenous shocks, how it affects the agricultural output and input market. And particularly in my research, when I set up the model, it features on capturing the shocks from both the supply and demand sides, and also the substitution between varieties of apples and international trade, and also trying to observing the output quantity, price, and welfare measures. And to summarize, the model will have two inputs, the farm inputs, the market inputs. For outputs, like the high value, high grade, high value, low grade, those ones, and US exporting apples to EU. And because both US and EU are big apple players in the international trade, so assume it's the world price, only one price here. And here are the equations of the simulation models. Equation number 1 to 4 are the equations for the output market, and the shocks. This one is from the first shock for the trade policy. It basically will decrease the export demand, so there will be one shock. And this shock is once after adopting the biomarker technology. In the long run, once the biomarker technology have gained the consumer recognition, then probably there will be increasing demand for those high value and high grade apples traded by the biomarker by the biomarker technology, which is considered as DPA, chemical residue free problem. So and then those three equations are modeling the input market. And then this shock will be the shock of technology adoption in the input supply function equation.
Does I stand for four kinds of apples?
Yes, exactly.
For UK side, they can import not from US but from other countries.
Yes.
And where is it in here?
So here I basically only look at this is the US market only.
Yes, but from EU side.
EU side, yeah, but this model
that should be in the export demand.
Yes, the EU. So this basically will be the demand, and the EU. So for US, apple export to EU are mainly four types.
Yeah, but from EU side, there are alternative imports, not only from US, from other countries.
But this model doesn't include that. This is based only on US market.
Yeah, but that will affect the export demand also.
This I basically assume it's like only in the EU only export to EU here in this one.
Yeah, but if EU changes, not from US but from other countries,
so you
that will definitely
affect the I.
amount.
So you basically say like I should include the other varieties of apples that EU could probably switch to.
Yes, in order to put into.
Okay. Okay, yeah, but here, so I didn't really. This is only focused on the 4 types that American export. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I will consider to add here. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. It will basically capture more substitution, in fact, like trade diversion. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. And then, so by total differentiation, here are the linear elasticity equations that we actually use to simulate the model. And the data, so for the price and quantity and market share, those data are mainly from the primary source, from the government publication, and also the first-hand information, the report from stakeholders from both the East and Western apple production region in the U.S., and also the price and quantity calculation.
I'm sorry, could you please go back to the previous slide? So what is sigma here?
Sigma. Here?
Yeah.
It's the substitution. It's the substitution. It's the Armington. It's the substitution. Yeah, that one. Between inputs. Substitution.
And what is gamma?
Gamma is the market share, I think.
Factor input share?
Yes. Yeah, I have a full table I didn't really include here about all
It's not easy
this.
how you to obtain these equations.
Oh, that's just a total differentiation. But in terms of all the definition of the parameters, like the gamma is the industry share of input input L used in the production of apple I, and gamma is the cost share. And sigma is the Allen elasticity of substitution between input.
Okay, we'll come back to that Allen elasticity.
Yes, that one actually used the Armington specification, which I know there are many criticisms about the Armington specification. And then so another like Yoshino Sensei point out, like for those simulation model, the key part is the elasticities and parameters. So the accuracy of the model result is really highly depends on the parameters and the elasticities. So so I basically got those from related literature, and by calculation and combined industry informations. And in order to make sure the robustness of the result, I did for all the baseline parameters, I assigned them to follow the prior distributions. So it basically it randomly generated, and all the simulation use the Monte Carlo simulation. So the calculation are iterated by 1,000 times. So all the results are reported as the mean value, and meanwhile providing the 95% confidence interval. This is like for the sensitivity check. And then so the shocks, based on this story, there will be shocks from both demand side and the supply side. So the demand side, I have calculated for about 5% drop in the apple export demand based on the U.S. International Trade Commission and the U.S. Apple Association's data. And the supply side, as for adopting the biomarker technology, assume for about 5% net benefit, which excludes the cost spent required in adopting the biomarker technology. And this is information, this 5% is estimated based on the pack-out rate, the quality, the predicted quality upgrade and other assumptions. And here are the two equations used to calculate the welfare measure, basically the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. So here there will be 4 different scenarios in the simulation model. So first of all, the first scenario is when there is purely the policy shock. So assume there is the 5% decrease in export demand of high-value, high-grade apple, which is the one mostly affected by the policy ban, due to the EU SPS regulation, the EU dropping of the maximum residual level, and assuming no other change on other apples. And the second scenario is the one with technological adoption. So 5% increase in the farm input because this biomarker affect the storage input, which is the farm input for high-value apple. So the high-value apples are the one highly susceptible to post-harvest disorder because of this biased new technology. And simulation 3 is the one probably we are mostly interested is the situation that when there's policy shock and then when there is the technology adoption, to see how the technology, how effective it is and how can it actually mitigate the trade policy shocks. And then scenario number 4 is in the long run, as I mentioned before, that in the long run, probably there will be consumers that become, even including the U.S. Domestic consumers, they will be more aware of the chemical residuals like the DPA effect. Maybe there's a negative effect on the health. So with that, the consumers will be better accept and recognize of the biomarker treated apple. So assuming in the long run that there will be a 15% increase in consumer demand for high value, high grade apples in the US. And of course, this is based on the scenario number 2 that you have to first adopt the technology. So there will be 4 different scenarios that way how we look at the simulation model. And here is the basic result table. And in order to make the numbers big enough, I didn't really include the confidence interval, but it's available in my paper. And so there are 4 columns showing the result for 4 different scenarios. And the first 2 rows are the marketing input market, how the input supply change. And those 2 rows are the farm input. And those 4 are the output price changes. And the last 4 rows are the output supply quantity change. So let's look at the first scenario. The first scenario is the one that when there is the trade policy shock. So we can start from here. Because of the trade policy, the export demand for high value, high grade apple will drop. So naturally, the output supply for this type of apple will drop at about 16%, which will distribute it to the farm input change and also the marketing input change, which are acquired to produce this apple, right? So we can see that for the because it's a high value apple which is relatively intensive in farm input. So the farm input for high value apples drop about 13%.
So these are elasticities.
Yeah, elasticity change.
The ones you underscored, these are like statistically significant, or?
Oh no, I just want to point out the no, it's not really.
Can you show me the demand curve of apple in your estimation?
A demand graph?
Demand curve, demand equation, demand estimations.
Okay, yeah, sure.
In econometrics.
No, this is simulation model. There's no econometric analysis. It's simulation, basically. It's a partial equilibrium model.
Oh, I see.
So there's no real trade data because the policy is really affected only imposed in 2014. So there are no no actual trade data available for now, I mean. So this is basically based on elasticity parameter and other price, quantity, market share information to build up a simulation model.
Suppose you estimate demand curve based on data. Then you can look at the price elasticity, income elasticity, and some others. In the past, there are many shocks in this Apple market. Then you can look at the impact of those shocks too.
So you mean like based on historical data to estimate the demand function?
Yeah.
Okay, here in this paper, I didn't do that. But about what you said, like the demand elasticity or those income elasticity.
Price, income, and other shock variables.
Those are included in those parameters specifications.
But you gave those parameters by yourself.
But I didn't estimate. I didn't estimate the function form or anything. It's just given.
Sorry. So these parameters, how did you estimate? Like based on
literature and specific calculation combining to Apple industry information.
I thought you used some ex-ante.
I thought that she used econometrics.
Oh yeah, but actually the one I refer to is another paper. They use econometric to estimate the demand function, and then the elasticity is based on their result basically. So
even this paper, I think it's.
I should also do the same thing. But that paper is really focused. It's done by USDA people who specialized on Apple. So that paper's estimation on Apple, the elasticity of Apple, I basically mainly refer to that. But it will be nice to include that part in this paper also.
Or you have your own estimation.
That's true. But maybe. In the future, I can definitely consider on that, estimate that by myself. So let's go back to the result table. So this basically will affect the farm input for high-value apple. It reduced by 13%. And then meanwhile, we see another impact in the low-value apple market. So because of the decreased supply to produce the high value high grade apples, there are the increased output supply for low value high grade apples for both the high grade and also the cost. So this is like the consumer consumption substitution impact for different.
But for farmer side, it takes time to change from high quality to low quality when they change the supply.
That's true. But most farmers, they produce not only one type of apple.
But if high quality is something shock, then they reduce high quality and increase others.
But
they cannot do it all of a sudden.
Of course, it takes time.
But do you have those adjustments? Equation?
I actually, this is not really considering the timing factor in the equation. I didn't include that. But this is basically just the simulation.
Long-term equilibrium results?
No, I didn't. I didn't. Long term. You're right. I didn't include the timing factor. But that's the. And then So
I think high quality has the biggest damage. And how about the lowest grade has very minimal damage?
That's true because it's not really affected by.
So how much will be the difference?
How much will be the difference?
Compared to the high quality and low quality. What are the impact?
Okay, that's interesting to be calculated.
No change on the price for the low value coals. That's actually goes up slightly in price.
It's actually not really big. I think probably there is the time impact also the complex reaction in the U.S. domestic market. And then for the second scenario is the one when you only have technology adoption. So the technology adoption apparently is improving the farm input for the high value apples. this is the most straightforward result. And of course, naturally, it will increase the total output supply for this high-value, high-grade apples. And here, the interesting thing is that, as we assumed in the beginning, that the high-value cows actually decrease. So this supposed to be some quality great upgrading of the of the cow's apples to the high-grade apples. So this is very small, but there is some upgrading in fact here. And then,
no, please.
Oh yeah. And then the scenario number 3 is the combination of 1 and 2. So here we can see there is some mitigation, but after adopting the technology, there is some mitigation of the trade policy shock. So although the total supply of high-value, high-grade apple still dropped by 12%, but the absolute value is smaller than the first scenario when there is only trade shock, no the technology adoption. Also, it affects the high-value farm input, and also the absolute value is smaller than in the first scenario. And those are also consistent dropping, but smaller than the high in the first scenario. Oh, but we see here the supply for the low value apples as consumption substitution actually increased, and I mean the magnitude is bigger than in the first scenario. So the biomarker technology is really effective in the short run. Really benefits the affecting the high value apples. And then the last scenario is in the long run when there is the consumer recognition of the biomarker technology. Then we can see that the high value, the farm input, the storage input for producing high value apples really increase, and in fact it's larger, it's bigger than in scenario 2 in the long run. And also the output supply for high value, high grade apple also increase. They in fact much bigger than the second scenario. And but the thing is, in the long run, actually the low value apple supply, output supply drops, because in the long run, the consumer may become aware of the health impact, and also they, of course, based on consumers' preference, but they may have the high value, high grade apple may become more and more popular. So in the long run, the supply for low value apple may drop slightly though.
But it depends on the long run preference.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But yeah, maybe slightly, yeah. Of course, it always depends on some consumers' preference is always consistent. And then, so here is the welfare analysis result. So it's the producer surplus and the consumer surplus for different types of apples, and the unit is in $1 million. So still the 4 different columns is 4 different scenarios. So we can see that for the scenario 1, when there's the trade policy shock, that the farmers who use the farm, who own the storage input, who own this farm input, they have producer surplus loss. Their their welfare was hurt by the trade policy directly. And the consumers who consume high-value, high-grade apples in U.S., which is also the trade policy-affected apples, their consumer welfare also got lost. And then in the second scenario, when there's technological adoption, then apparently in the short run, with the biomarker technology, which is farm factor intensive, the producers who adopted technology they have a little bit producer surplus gain.
Are you including the cost of those technology?
The cost was already excluded. This shock is a net benefit.
Yeah, but if the cost becomes higher.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Then
I didn't include the.
This will become much smaller.
Oh yeah, but the second scenario is just a short-run adoption. But I think in the fourth scenario, which is in the long run, I should definitely consider the cost. Cost increase. That's true. Yeah. Thank you for the suggestion. And then, so the third one is the mitigation impact when you adopt the technology as a solution, solution reaction to the trade policy change. So again, here we can see that the producers who actually adopt the technology will gain a producer surplus even with the trade policy change. And in the last scenario, like Yoshino Sensei point out, here is in the long run, and we see the producer surplus for the who adopted the technology, and also in the long run, the consumer surplus actually decreased. This is because of the price increase. Yeah, and I think I should also, I definitely should include in the long run, the cost increase of the technology adoption. Thank you. So then the conclusion, to just quickly summarize. So in terms of the trade policy, based on the simulation result, we see that the EU trade policy change has will negatively affected the U.S. Apple markets, both the input and output. And the impact is actually quite large and complex because of this non-tariff trade measures and the complexity of the domestic input-output market. Also because of the differentiation, there are so many different types of apples. And then there's the welfare loss of producers who adopt policy affecting farm input, and also consumer who purchase exported policy affected apples, both in the short run with the trade policy shock. And then for the technology adoption, the biased technological innovation mitigate the policy impact and favors the initially policy harmed products. And Apple producers, they could diversify their production, include more like varieties of apples, and invest on different input like storage and also marketing input to reduce the risk for any exogenous policy shocks. And of course, for developed countries, there should be increasing private and increasing R&D budget from both the private and public sectors. And at the end, I just want to touch a little bit for developing countries for the future and more broader research. As mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the increasing number of NTMs basically posed on food safety, sustainable development, environmental issues, which particularly affect the agriculture sector. And there are usually those stricter standards and regulations are imposed and initiated by the developed countries, because they are always the one like more conscious, and because they are in the faster in the higher development stage in terms of economic, so their consumers are more concerned about not only the food safety but also in the long run some sustainable development issue. So they are always the one initiating the standards and impose them. So this really has been creating challenges for agriculture producers in the developing country if they really want to continue participating in the international agriculture trade and access to the developed countries market. So the technological policy-induced, or I could say policy-mandated in this case, like the policy ban basically mandate producers in other countries to take some action. In the long run, it will benefit producers through though initially could cause reductions in the welfare initially. And the impact of policy together with biased technology could affect trade patterns and production levels for certain regions in the long run, which will also affect some structural transformation, particularly for developing countries in the agriculture sector. So,
okay, thank you very much.